The city inspector was already measuring the setback line when Isaac Rowe walked outside, clipboard out, laser tool up, boot prints in his flower bed. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to stay back while I document the violation." Isaac blinked. "Violation of what?" The inspector didn't answer, just kept pacing along the edge of Isaac's retaining wall like it was a crime scene. Across the street, two neighbors watched from their porches, no subtlety, no shame, and standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac, arms folded like she owned the pavement, was Judith Kern, president of the Ridgegate Pines HOA. She wasn't smiling, she was nodding. It had started a week earlier, quiet, off script. Isaac had hired a local crew to repave his front walkway. He'd drawn the design himself, sleek concrete pavers with a low curve toward the driveway. ADA compliant, 48 inches wide, no slope issues. It matched the elevation. It was beautiful, and most importantly, it was legal. Every detail had been submitted to the city. He'd pulled his own permits. Why? Because he wrote them. Isaac wasn't just a homeowner, he was a municipal code author, contracted by the city, consultant for the last 12 years, helped draft the zoning overlays for residential stormwater management and accessibility compliance. The irony, he'd once helped review Ridgegate Pines' own HOA development agreement, long before he moved in. But none of that mattered now, because the new walkway didn't match neighborhood design standards, not in Judith's eyes. The complaints started small. One morning, a sticky note on his trash bin, "Too modern for Ridgegate." 2 days later, a stranger rang the doorbell and said he was checking setback compliance. Isaac asked if he was from the HOA. The man walked off without answering. By Thursday, Judith was standing across the street taking photos with an old DSLR. When Isaac asked her what she was doing, she said, "Protecting property values." When he pointed out that his improvements were fully permitted by the city, she smiled. "The city's opinion doesn't override our covenants." That was when he realized, she had no idea. Saturday morning, the city truck pulled up, plain white Ford, magnetized logo, code enforcement. Isaac's daughter was playing chalk on the sidewalk. She looked up at the man getting out of the truck, like he was a cartoon villain. "Daddy, is that guy gonna arrest us?" "No, baby," he said. "Not us." The inspector didn't introduce himself, just walked the property line, checked a paper form, then asked to see Isaac's permit. Isaac pulled it out of his kitchen drawer, laminated, time-stamped, digitally signed by 2 departments. The inspector barely glanced at it. "I'll still need to report this to my supervisor." The HOA raised a concern about concrete encroachment. "They said you're extending into the public right-of-way." "I wrote the right-of-way standards," Isaac said. Silence. "You what?" "Check section 14.22.3-C. I wrote that clause 4 years ago." The inspector went pale. Isaac wasn't angry, he was insulted, because it wasn't just about concrete or setbacks, it was about control, about using bureaucracy to bury people who dared to design outside the lines. Judith didn't call code enforcement, because she thought Isaac had broken a rule. She called because he didn't ask her first, and in her world, that was worse. Later that night, Isaac pulled out his laptop, not to write a complaint, to write a report. Every line, every lie, every false statement the HOA had filed. He documented how Judith misrepresented the walkway as an unpermitted structure. He cross-referenced city records, showing she'd done the same thing to 2 other homeowners in the past year, both of whom backed down and paid fines they didn't owe. She'd weaponized compliance, turned it into a tool to keep people quiet. But this time she'd targeted the one man who knew exactly where her fake authority ended, and the next morning, that man was going to email the actual city department she claimed to represent, with her name in bold at the top. Isaac Rowe didn't retaliate on Facebook, he didn't post in the Ridgegate Pines group chat, didn't fire off a next-door rant, didn't argue with Judith on her sidewalk power strolls. He got quiet, not submissive, surgical. The moment the city inspector stepped off his lawn, Isaac went to work. He dug into his archive, 10 years of documentation, written policy drafts, cross-department memos. He pulled the original Ridgegate Pines developer submission from 2009 and traced its evolution across 3 zoning updates. And there it was, the section Judith never read properly, clause 14.22, 3C, which Isaac wrote himself. included a homeowner exemption for ADA-compliant paths so long as they did not extend more than 30 inches into the utility setback, and maintained stormwater runoff standards. His path was 27 inches. Judith had submitted her complaint, using the term illegal hardscaping. Isaac found that exact phrase in a 2020 newsletter she wrote, where she incorrectly claimed residents couldn't install raised beds without board approval. He remembered because that newsletter got quietly pulled after a veteran landscaper in the neighborhood corrected her publicly. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern. Isaac documented everything in a PDF, titled Unauthorized Use of Code Enforcement for Personal HOA Disputes, Ridgegate Pines HOA, 2023-24. He included satellite images, permit records, a side-by-side comparison of his path, and 4 others nearby, all built under the same exemption, none cited, and a full copy of Judith's email to code enforcement, which he obtained through a public records request. The subject line of her email: urgent fire lane encroachment, unauthorized build, homeowner non-compliant. She hadn't just lied, she'd escalated the accusation to a potential emergency services obstruction. That was a felony-level misrepresentation. On Monday morning, Isaac sent the PDF to 3 city departments: Code Enforcement, Public Works, Legal Review. He CC'd the deputy zoning director, and a council member he'd once consulted with on sidewalk easements. Then he waited. Not long. Tuesday afternoon, he got a call from a blocked number. "Mr. Rowe, this is Deputy Zoning Director Miles Chen. Got your file. Thorough as hell. Appreciate that. Just so you know, we pulled the report that led to your inspection." Her email used official-sounding language. She implied she had board authority to speak on our behalf. "She doesn't. We know." There was a pause. A different tone entered the call. "We've dealt with HOAs overstepping before, but yours, this one's unique." Because she went after someone who actually knew what the code said. Exactly. That Friday, the city issued a formal correction, a letter, sent directly to Judith Kern, stating that the complaint against Isaac was baseless, his property was in full compliance, the HOA had no authority to interpret municipal code, and future misuse of city departments would be reviewed as abuse of process. They CC'd the entire board. Isaac didn't frame that letter either. He just made 12 printed copies. Saturday, he showed up to the monthly HOA meeting, not as a disruptor, as a reminder. The room was more full than usual. Word had spread. A few people who normally kept their heads down had brought notebooks. The guy from Lot 17, who'd once been fined for painting his shutters without pre-clearance, was seated in the front row. Judith started the meeting like nothing had happened. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we've been making important strides on property aesthetics and consistency." Isaac stood. "I'd like to speak under the homeowner concerns portion. That's at the end of the agenda," she replied. "This is the agenda." He handed a packet to each board member, stapled, labeled. "This is a record of a false complaint filed by this board's president. It resulted in the misuse of city code enforcement officers, a formal investigation, and a written warning to this HOA." No one breathed. Isaac didn't shout. He didn't point fingers. He just read the last line from the city's letter. "Any further representation of municipal authority by Ridgegate Pines HOA members will result in a formal complaint with the district attorney's office." Then he sat back down. Judith's voice cracked when she asked to move to the next item. The room didn't move with her, because something had shifted. She hadn't just lost control, she'd lost the illusion of it. The silence after Isaac Rowe finished reading the last line of the city's letter was thick enough to choke on. Judith Kern didn't respond right away. She just sat there, hands on the table, staring at the packet like she could will it into rewriting itself. But the ink was dry. The names were real. The seal from the city was stamped in blue at the bottom of page 1. Across the room someone coughed. A chair creaked. Then, for the first time since she took over as HOA president, someone else spoke first. "Madam President," said Alan from Lot 17, "are you going to explain this?" Judith blinked. "Explain what?" "Why you used code enforcement to harass a homeowner over a legal project." "It wasn't harassment," she snapped. "It was a misunderstanding. You believed you had the right to impersonate city authority," Isaac said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "You're twisting this. I submitted a fully permitted improvement. You filed a false complaint, and misrepresented your authority to a municipal office." He let that sit. "Those are not my words. They're from the deputy zoning director." A beat passed. Then Ruth Carter, An elderly board member who rarely spoke, set her copy of the letter on the table. I'd like to make a motion. Heads turned. Judith froze. A motion for what? She asked. A vote of no confidence. Judith's mouth dropped. That's absurd. Based on one complaint. No, Ruth said. Based on a pattern. This is just the first time someone had the power to stop you. The room stirred. Alan stood. Seconded. You can't do this, Judith hissed. You need a formal petition. The bylaws state, Section 8.1, Isaac said, pulling out a second printed page. Special removal may be initiated by majority vote of board members, if conduct threatens legal liability. He didn't even look at her when he read it. He looked at the room. Neighbors, parents, retirees, people who'd received her icy emails for years and quietly swallowed the consequences. Now for the first time, they had a chance to speak without whispering. Let's vote, Ruth said. Wait. Judith tried to interrupt, but it was already happening. All in favor. Ruth raised her hand. Alan followed. So did Emma from Lot 24, then Greg, then Sonia. 5 hands went up, fast, clear. Only Judith kept hers down. Majority reached, Ruth said calmly. Effective immediately, Judith Kern is removed as board president. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to, because the silence this time was different. Not fear, relief. Judith stood slowly, gathered her things like someone forced to leave a dinner party she once hosted. This won't stick, she muttered. You'll regret this. No one replied. She walked out of the room with the same crisp posture she always carried, just without the audience. And this time, when the door closed behind her, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a door finally closing on an era. Ruth turned back to the room. We'll need to appoint an interim president, she said. But first I think we owe Mr. Rowe an apology. Heads nodded. Not just from the board, from the neighbors. Isaac didn't smile. He didn't say I told you so. He just stood and said, let's make sure this board never forgets who it's actually supposed to represent. Someone clapped, then another, and then the whole room was on its feet, not cheering, just standing, together. That night, Isaac didn't sleep. He didn't need to. For the first time in months, no one was watching his yard. There were no clipboards, no shadowy walk-bys, no strangers sent to pretend they were checking compliance, just peace. And on his desk sat the same manila folder from the meeting, still open, still stamped, still true, because sometimes the cleanest takedown isn't loud, it's structured, it's backed by law, and it comes from the one person you should have never underestimated. The guy who wrote the rulebook. Judith Kern didn't fight her removal, not publicly. She sent a 3-sentence email to the board 3 days later, resigning from all HOA involvement, effective immediately. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a hollow line at the end. I hope the board continues to uphold Ridgegate's standards. By the following week, her porch flags were gone. The concrete goose she dressed for every holiday disappeared overnight, and the once daily neighborhood walkthroughs stopped completely. She wasn't seen at any more meetings. She didn't wave from her window. Eventually, her car disappeared from the driveway altogether. Someone else mowed her lawn, and in a place like Ridgegate Pines, that said more than words ever could. The board held an emergency session the following weekend. No drama, no infighting, just accountability. Ruth Carter was appointed interim president. Unanimous vote. Alan drafted a public statement that was posted on the community bulletin, the HOA website, and emailed to every homeowner. It read, in part, the board deeply regrets the inappropriate escalation of authority and misuse of city resources that occurred under prior leadership. The Ridgegate Pines HOA does not, and will not, operate above municipal law. It didn't mention Judith by name. It didn't need to. Then came the audit. Elijah's packet had opened more than just eyes. It had raised questions. Why did only certain homes receive landscaping notices? Why had 2 permit-approved tree removals been reversed, costing homeowners thousands? Why were aesthetic violations more common on one side of the neighborhood than the other? So the board voted to launch a full policy review. They called it the Bylaw Reconciliation Project. Isaac didn't push to lead it, but Ruth asked him anyway. You know the system, she said. You built it. Help us fix ours. He agreed, on one condition: transparency from now on. Everything gets posted. No more secret meetings. No more whispers. Done, Ruth said. And just like that, the same board that once tried to weaponize compliance started rewriting itself in plain sight. But the real fallout wasn't in the documents. It was in the way people started showing up. The guy who never attended a single meeting before, he brought donuts. The woman who'd once cried after being fined for hanging her laundry outside, she volunteered to help rewrite the outdoor usage rules. Even the couple from Lot 9, who'd been too nervous to repaint their mailbox without written permission, finally went with navy blue. No one reported them, no one blinked, because Ridgegate Pines wasn't just shedding Judith's rules, it was shedding her culture. Isaac's yard didn't change. He kept the same curve in the walkway, the same modern path lights, the same stone finish Judith once called too urban, but now, people stopped to compliment it. One afternoon, a neighbor walking her dog slowed down and pointed. "I didn't realize how sharp that looked before." "Thanks," Isaac said. "We're thinking about redoing ours. You mind if I ask who did your concrete?" "Actually," he smiled, "I designed it myself." That weekend, the board hosted a community open house, not in the clubhouse, on the green space near the dog park, wide open, no sign-in sheets, no formal agenda, just conversation, coffee, kids running barefoot. Isaac didn't speak at the event, but Ruth did. She raised her cup and said, to every person who thought their voice didn't matter, "This is your HOA now." Applause. Real, earned. The city never pursued charges against Judith, but her name was flagged internally on a watch list for false reporting, and unofficially, the next neighborhood over, the one she moved to, made it clear she wasn't getting anywhere near their board. Turns out, HOA reputations follow you, especially when you get caught lying to code enforcement about the man who wrote the actual code. Isaac Rowe never told his daughter the full story. She was too young to understand how neighborhood politics worked, how a sidewalk could spark a standoff, how power could be misused with a clipboard and a bad attitude. All she needed to know was that the chalk drawings she made on the driveway were safe now. No one would knock, no one would report, no one would call them a violation. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not fear, not tension, relief. A month after Judith left Ridgegate Pines, Isaac stood at the edge of his yard, trimming the rosemary hedge she once called visual clutter. A familiar voice called from across the street, still the best-looking path in the neighborhood. It was Alan. He crossed over with 2 coffees, handed one to Isaac, and nodded toward the yard. "People ask about your design all the time now." Isaac smirked. "Funny, wasn't exactly popular 6 weeks ago." "That's how change works," Alan said. "It's loud when it threatens the wrong people, then it gets quiet when it helps the right ones." They stood in silence, watching a kid ride by on a bike with rainbow streamers flying behind him. No one stopped him. No one scolded his parents. No one filed a complaint about decorative distractions. And that was the win. The HOA never returned to what it was. That wasn't a loss. The rules didn't disappear. They got rewritten, with input. Isaac helped draft a new homeowner review clause. Every policy passed by the board had to be posted publicly for 10 days before a vote. No more surprise citations. No more closed-door decisions. No more fear, dressed as formality. He didn't join the board, but they still called him the guy who saved Ridgegate. He always laughed when he heard it, because he didn't save it. He just made it tell the truth. One night, his daughter asked, "Daddy, why don't you ever say anything when people talk about the path?" Isaac smiled. "Because if it works," he said, "it doesn't need defending." She nodded like she understood, and maybe somehow she did. As the sun dipped behind the pines, Isaac stood one last time at the edge of the walkway. Judith tried to erase. It was still there, still legal, still his, still standing. And now, so was the neighborhood. Not because someone screamed, but because someone knew exactly how the rules were written, and refused to let them be rewritten in silence. They thought they could bury him in the fine print. They forgot he was the one who printed it.